What if you could remember everything that you wanted to? What if you could look at something just once and never forget it? If you have poor memory, this probably sounds like a dream, but developing a superior memory is actually very possible. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how it's done. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist with a PhD in neuroscience. I teach people how they can use their brain better by understanding how it works. I help you become smarter, not with some weird magic spells, but with science-based advice. Let's get started. When I teach people about memory, they always want to know what are some easy tricks to remember stuff better. They want a cheat code to enter into the brain to unlock better memory. But here's the thing. There is no single trick to improve your memory. It doesn't work like that. The way you store information in your brain is a complex process involving many steps. Each step needs to be optimized. There is no shortcut. There are two major steps involved in storing information. You need to first get the information into your brain, which means you need to pay attention to it. And second, you need to put the information into storage. In other words, you need to make your brain care about the information so it will keep it. So that's what we're going to focus on in this video. Getting information from your environment into your brain and putting it into storage. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what happens when you learn new information and how you can hack the system so you never forget anything again. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how you sometimes see something or hear something and suddenly you remember some obscure detail about that thing? Like all of a sudden you remember someone's name after you've been trying to remember it for days. Or you hear a song on the radio and suddenly you remember some random event from high school. This happens because our brain stores information in different ways. You don't only store facts and names and random things like that in your head, you also store experiences and events and emotions and images and sounds. All of these together make up your memories. So even if you didn't consciously pay attention to something, you still might remember it because it was somehow connected to something else that you did pay attention to. This is called associative memory. So the first step to developing a superior memory is to realize that you do and need to pay attention to every little detail. Your brain already does that for you. Instead, focus your attention on connecting new information to things that you already know. And the best way to do this is through stories. Stories are an extremely powerful mnemonic device. By making up a story that connects pieces of information, you can remember them much more easily. For example, imagine that you need to tell someone your phone number. You probably wouldn't just say the numbers in order, because it would be pretty hard to remember. But if you made up a story that used each digit to trigger a memorable image, you would never forget your phone number again. For example, you could say, I was at a restaurant, and I ordered 2 pizzas and a salad. Then I went home and read a book until 9 p.m. I arrived home at 7 o'clock. I ate 3 apples and drank 2 cups of coffee. And then I slept. Now, if someone asked you any part of your phone number, you could tell them without thinking too long about it, because each number is tied to a memorable story. Now, if you were really creative, you could probably come up with a story for any set of data that you need to memorize. You just have to make sure that each piece of data is connected to the story in a meaningful way. So step 1 of developing a superior memory is to use stories to connect new information to old information. But there's another technique that you can use to make remembering information easier, and it's called chunking. Have you ever looked at a long string of numbers and realized that you could break them up into smaller groups? That's what chunking is, breaking up large amounts of data into smaller chunks. You've ever had a cell phone? You probably already know that most phone numbers are broken up into 3 chunks. This makes it much easier to remember them. But you can apply this principle to all kinds of data, even data that isn't a phone number. For example, if you needed to remember a long list of grocery items, you could chunk them together based on where they are in the store. You might have a chunk for produce, another chunk for dairy, another for frozen foods, and so on. Chunking works because it reduces the amount of effort that you have to put into retrieving the information. When you're trying to remember something, your brain has to make thousands of connections between neurons to find the right information. The more chunks of data there are, the more effort it takes to retrieve them. But if you can break the data up into smaller chunks, it becomes much easier to retrieve it. So step 2 of developing a superior memory is to chunk data together, so it is easier to remember. Now that you know how to take large amounts of information and break them down into smaller pieces, let's talk about how you can store information in your brain so you never forget it. First, you need to understand that there are different types of memory. And depending on what kind of information you're trying to store, you need to use different strategies. For example, if you're trying to remember a fact, you won't use the same strategies as you would to remember a skill. Let's start with facts. Facts are bits of information that are stored in your brain as memories. For example, Paris is the capital of France, or water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. If you're trying to remember a fact, you need to understand what kind of memory you're dealing with. Is it a visual fact? A fact that relates to something that you can see, or a verbal fact that relates to something that you can hear? Once you understand the type of fact you're dealing with, you can use a strategy called elaboration. Elaboration is a way of making new information more meaningful. You do this by connecting new information to things that you already know. For example, if you were trying to remember that Paris is the capital of France, you might think about the Eiffel Tower, which is located in Paris. By connecting new information to things that you already know, you make it easier for your brain to store and retrieve the information later. Another strategy that you can use to remember facts is called visualization. Visualization is basically a form of elaboration, but it's specifically about creating mental images to represent concepts. So, for example, if you were trying to remember the word elephant, you might visualize an elephant in your mind. Elephants have big ears and tusks, and they live in Africa. By visualizing an elephant, you're creating a mental image that represents the concept elephant. And the more vivid and detailed the mental image, the easier it will be for you to remember. Now, before we move on to discussing how to remember skills and procedures, if you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button. It tells the platform that you find videos like this useful, and it helps me grow my channel so I can keep making videos for you. Thank you. Okay, now let's talk about how to remember skills and procedures. Skills and procedures are different from facts because they involve motor movements. A skill is something that you can do, like riding a bike or playing the piano. A procedure is a series of steps that you follow to achieve a certain goal, like how to bake a cake or how to tie a shoelace. Because skills and procedures involve motor movements, you need to practice them in order to remember them. You can't just learn a skill or a procedure once and expect to remember it forever. You need to keep practicing it in order to keep your memory of the skill or procedure strong. Now, there are different ways that you can practice a skill or procedure to improve your memory of it. One way is to practice the skill or procedure in a variety of situations. For example, if you're learning how to ride a bike, you might want to practice riding in a park, on a trail, and on the street. The more situations you practice in, the more general the skill or procedure will become, and the easier it will be for you to remember. Another way that you can practice a skill or procedure is to practice it with a partner. If you have someone to practice with, you can get feedback on your performance and make adjustments as needed. Feedback is extremely important for improving your memory of a skill or procedure because it allows you to identify what you need to work on. Now, if you're trying to remember a complex skill or procedure, you might want to break it down into smaller chunks. For example, if you're trying to learn how to play the piano, you might start by learning how to play simple songs with just a few notes. As you get better, you can add more notes and more complexity to the songs you play. Chunking works because it reduces the amount of effort that you have to put into remembering the skill or procedure. So to summarize, if you're trying to remember a fact, use strategies like visualization and elaboration. If you're trying to remember a skill or a procedure, practice it in a variety of situations and break it down into smaller chunks. And that's it. That's how you develop a superior memory. You may not be able to remember every single thing that you ever see or hear, but if you use the tips and techniques that I taught you in this video, you'll be able to remember a lot more than you do now. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. As always, thank you for watching.